Hello, this is Snugglefairy, and I will be doing a series of tutorials for the Mi-24 Hind. Today I'm going to be doing just the module setup and the takeoff tutorial, but I will go over all of its systems in the future videos. So first things first, when you get the module, if you're new to DCS, new to helicopters, or just haven't had the module for a while, there's some setup you should do. And I apologize, my client is in Russian, but all your settings should be in the same spot, so you will be able to match them. So first thing you should go into settings, and there is a special tab right back here with all your modules in this list on the left. You're gonna want to find the Mi-24 Hind, and there are a couple settings you should take a look at here. So the first setting is the trimmer mode setting that we're looking at. It has three options: the default, the option for the joysticks with the centering spring, and the option for the joysticks with force feedback. Majority of us don't have force feedback joysticks, so make sure you set this to the centering spring joystick trimmer. And also there is a selector here for the language of the cockpit. There's the default one, which is Russian, and the English one. Also, there are other options here like rudder pedal trimmer and stuff like that, but I don't use it because it's not realistic. It doesn't have that. Next thing you want to is go into your control settings, and there is on this drop-down menu here, there is a bunch of tabs for the Mi-24. There is the pilot seat, the pilot's operator seat, the Petrovich menus tab, and there's also one up here for the aiming station. The issue with the default settings is there are going to be a bunch of double binds, and if you try to fly with that, your helicopter is going to do a barrel roll into the ground, and that'll be it. So what you want to do, you want to take a look at your devices here. I have Thrustmaster combined, which is combines the flight stick and the throttle when you run the Thrustmaster program, and I have the rudder pedals. So what you want to do is you want to click on this Thrustmaster combined anywhere, and you want to clear the category. And you want to do the same thing for all your controllers, for all your joysticks and your rudder pedals. Then you're going to click OK. Then you're going to go back into the settings, and then you're going to drop this menu down and go into access commands. Again, same thing. You're going to clear the category for all your controllers here because there's going to be a bunch of double binds. And you're going to want to do that for every single one of these menus here for the pilot operator, well, the Petrovich menu doesn't really have anything like that, but we will get to it in another video. And the aiming station as well. And then you want to manually bind pitch, roll, the collective, the rudder pedals, and I also have bound the throttle, which is not necessary. You can just move it with the mouse. And I have a zoom function bound to my joystick as well. And that should be enough for you to be able to fly the helicopter. Then you want to go into this, there's an other tab here. And one of the options here is to synchronize all the switches and controls with your joystick. And you want to uncheck that. It has caused issues previously with people just rolling to their death on spawn. I'm not sure why, but I have this unchecked and I don't have any problems with that. So that should be all for the setup, and we should be able to move to startup. Okay guys, welcome to your pilot's workstation. This is where you're going to be primarily operating the Mi-24 Hind from. The way I do my startup isn't exactly according to all the realistic procedures, doing all the checks and all kinds of stuff. I do kind of a simplified version, and it's not exactly according to the manual, but the way I do it makes sense, and I will try to explain why I do everything I do, and I'm gonna try to explain why I flick every switch I flick. In real life, you're required to do a lot of checks while you start up the aircraft to make sure that all the systems are functioning correctly and there's no faults in any of the systems. But it is not required in DCS because every time you spawn, you get a brand new bird with all the systems functioning perfectly. You do not need to worry about the checks. There's not going to be anything wrong with them unless you break some personally. Also, I don't omit certain things that cause unnecessary engine wear or system wear. I try to start it up in such a way that preserves the engines, preserves all the systems. But again, it's not required in DCS, and the startup can be done faster. Again, every time you spawn, you get a brand new bird with brand new engines. Everything is functioning perfectly. But I still don't omit those things because that's just how I play. So first things first, you got this seat and the stick a little bit in the way for the startup, and you press the backspace in order to hide this. And we're just gonna hide it for now. So if you come to the right here, by your right hip, this is where your electrical panels are. This is where you control the aircraft's electric supply. So this aircraft has a DC power panel and AC power panel. Some systems function off direct currents and some systems function from alternating currents. The way it works is you have two batteries left and right that are DC, 27 volts I believe, and you have AC generators that are tied to your rotor blades. So when your rotor blades are spinning and the generators are on, it generates AC power. Depending on how fast your rotor blades are spinning, it generates different voltage, but the systems need a specific voltage to function. That's why you have these two transformers, one 15 volt and 36 volt. So when the generators are running, these switches need to be on as well for the systems to be powered. And then it has rectifiers. It takes that AC power and it turns it to DC 27 volts. Some systems are tied to the batteries and some systems are tied to the rectifiers. And that will become important later on. So first thing you do is you turn on two main batteries, left and right. Now the systems that are tied to the batteries will function, but we also need some systems that are tied to the rectifiers. Some systems include radio stations. All the radio stations except one tied to the rectifiers. This is why we have this switch here. It connects the rectifier systems to the battery systems. And you flick the switch up. Then you need this inverter, PO750. It takes the 27 volts DC and it converts it into this 115 volt AC. And that turns on systems that need this 115 volt AC power. And one of these systems is these exhaust temperature gauges. You need them to for the engine startup to see if there is combustion in the engines. Next thing we do, we come back to this panel at the back here, and you can click switches individually if you like, or you can click this and it will turn all the switches on. You just hold it to bring it up and then you let it go. And you got the same panel on the left. These are the main circuit breakers for all the systems.
Лук Ри-65 исправен. Отказал насос расходного бака. Отказал генератор.
There are usually multiple switches you can use to shut off a specific system, and this is just one of their redundancies. Next thing I do is turn on these two intercom switches and three radio switches. The R863, R828, and R853, which is this one. Now all your radios will function, including your intercom, If you're using SRS, you can talk to your front seat pilot, and you can talk to ground control or whoever. You can listen to ATIS. Then I like to turn on the tail strobe, the beacon light, and also the navigation lights into bright. There has 3 settings: dim, middle, off, and bright. And why I do it is just to signal to aircraft around me that I'm about to start up. Next thing you do is you need the fire extinguisher system. You need your safety first before you do any sort of combustion, any sort of engine startup or APU startup. So this has the master switch right here. You gotta flick it up, and the yellow light comes on. It means that the extinguisher system is in the test mode, and this is the switch that flicks it into the operating mode, this fire extinguishing mode. Now that the fire extinguishers are functioning, we can start opening up the fuel valves and starting the APU. 2 things that you need for an internal combustion engine is electricity and fuel. And we already taken care of the electricity. Now it's time to turn the fuel on. You have 3 sets of fuel shutoff valves: the service tank shutoff valves, the fire safety shutoff valves, and the engine stop shutoff valves. They all stop or supply fuel to the engines, but they all serve a different purpose. You got these safety shutoff valves here that, if I understand the system correctly, they are located closer to the fuel tanks, and in case of a fuel line damage or engine fire, these are the switches you want to shut off to stop the fuel getting fed to the engine, to stop supplying the fire with the element to burn. These 2 are the switches for the service tanks. So let's say if there's a fuel leak and you need to isolate the tank so it doesn't leak all the fuel out, these are the switches you would use. These are also fuel tank shutoff valves. They're located at the service fuel tanks, and it's just a redundancy to these valves. And you also got these 2 valves at the back here, which are the engine shutoff valves, and I believe they are located closer to the engines. If you flick these switches when the engines are running, if you flick these switches off, it will take a little bit for the engine to shut off. It will still have fuel in the lines that will keep flowing to the engine. But if you need to shut the engine off fast, these are the switches you would use. They shut off the fuel at the engines, and the engine has no fuel immediately, and the engine stops. So to supply the fuel to the engines, you need the 2 service tanks shutoff valves on. You need the 2 fire valves shutoffs on. You also need this switch on. It's the divider between the tanks in 4 and 5, so that fuel can flow between them freely. And you need 4 pumps for the tanks 4, 5, 1, and 2. Now the APU is ready for startup. The engine startup panel is just down here. It has both APU on the left and the engine on the right. So by default, this switch is in the start position, but you gotta make sure that it's down in the start position, and you just press start for the APU start. It's kind of hard to see, but the auto on light is on. That means the ignition is on, and the exhaust temperatures are rising for the APU. When this light extinguishes, that means you can proceed to starting the engines right now. These 2 lights illuminate, saying the normal oil pressure in the APU and that the APU is in the correct RPM range. Usually I don't stare at the APU panel. You'll hear if something goes wrong with it. I switch to this side and I close the door. And here you have a rotor blade brake. After the APU is started, the next step is to start the engines. But the engines will not start if the rotor brake is on, because when the engines are starting, they start to spin the rotor, and it has a safety built in. It won't even let you start the engine if this thing is up. So I flick this down, and then I go to this valve, and that seals the cabin doors to seal the pressure so the air doesn't leak. You want to open this valve, and you want to watch this light. So this light says doors unsealed right now, and it should turn green down here when the doors are sealed. Here we go, doors are sealed. Next step is to start the engines. Now I like to flick this left and right switch down and up. Just sometimes when I would start the engine without doing it, the engine would not start for whatever reason. So I just kind of got into a habit of doing it. Maybe there's a bug or something. And you want to make sure this switch is in start position. It's in start by default. And then you press engine start. The auto on light comes on and the starter on light comes on. Then you see the RPM rising and the oil pressure rising. You want to introduce fuel into the combustion chamber by pushing this valve forward, and you watch the exhaust temperatures. The exhaust temperatures start spiking up if there's combustion in the engines. If it goes past 20%, that means the engine startup is proceeding normally as it should. So when this light extinguishes, it means we can proceed to starting the next engine. Flick the switch to the right and press the start. And it's the same procedure. Starter is on, the RPM are rising, the oil pressure is rising. Introduce fuel into the combustion chamber. Watch the exhaust temperatures. Exhaust temperatures are spiking, there's a combustion in the engine. And the arrow is going past 20%. Also, your roller blades are starting to spin when you start the engines, and this is your gauge right here that tells you the roller blade RPM. Now both engines have started, and they are idling at about 75%. Next thing I do is I turn this switch on. It's the anti-dust system switch. And the two green lights are here. They will come on here when the anti-dust system is functioning. And I usually wait for them to come on before I bring the engine RPM up. Now the anti-dust system is on. Now you don't have to use this system because I don't think dust even is modeled in DCS, and it doesn't really hurt the engines immediately. Dust hurts engines over time. So which is again will not affect in DCS because every time you spawn with brand new engines. But I use it anyways because you would use it in real life. The next thing to do is turn the throttle on the collective all the way to the right. Now you can press the backspace again to bring back the seat, and this is the collective down here, and this is the throttle, and it works opposite than in a Western aircraft. It goes to the right to increase the RPM, and you want to turn it all the way to the right. The way you do it is you click hold the right mouse button on it, and then you drag it over, and then this is all the way up, and your engines are coming up, and they are bringing up the blade RPM. This is the automatic mode for the blade RPM, and the engines basically will keep the blades between these two marks. If the blade RPM goes past this yellow mark, it has the potential of damaging the blades, for blades to come off and breaking themselves apart basically. And if the blades RPM go below this mark, the generators will not provide enough voltage for the transformers to work. Now that the blade RPM is in the correct range, next step is to turn on the AC generators and all the power. I'm gonna hide the seat again by pressing backspace, And I'm gonna turn on the 2 AC generators and then 2 transformers into the up position, into the main position. So now the system is supplied with AC power. Then I turn on 2 rectifiers, and now all the systems are supplied in DC power. Now we no longer need this switch to connect the batteries and the rectifiers, and we no longer need this inverter because the transformers are now functioning. Now that the electrical system is on, we don't no longer need the APU, so the next step is to stop the APU by pressing this button. And when you stop it, you hear the very distinctive whine, and the exhaust temperatures are coming down. Now you got all the power supplied to your systems. Now it's just a question of turning them all on. The way I do it, I just go from left to right, and I just do one pass and I turn everything on. Up here you have the radar altimeter, the Doppler system, the 2 gyroscopes, the navigation system, the radar warning receiver, the radar warning receiver sound alerts, the warning lights blink, and the IFF panel. Now sometimes if you're on a server with a bunch of radars in the air painting you, this radar warning receiver up here is gonna go nuts. It's gonna beep very loudly, and I couldn't find a volume knob for it, so it's quite obnoxious. This is how it beeps. I pressed the test button. So I like to turn off the sound if I'm not too worried about anything shooting at me, and now there won't be any sound. Next thing I do is I turn this it's like a black box. It records all your radio communications and all the warning messages that you get. It's a black box for if you crashed later. The crew recovers, and they can determine what exactly went wrong. Obviously in real life it's not really simulated here, it doesn't really record anything, but I still turn it on. Then I turn these 2 switches. These are your signal flares, colored signal flares. I just turn them on preemptively so I can use them whenever I need to. Then I go down to here, this RQ2 navigation system, and I turn it on as well. I'll do a separate video for all the navigation systems, but this is one of the things you can use to navigate. Now down here you have your compass settings. So the way this compass works, it's separate from your magnetic compass, which is right up here. It's just a magnetic compass, and you can press a button and you can align the heading with the magnetic compass. But then it needs to the switch needs to go into this gyro mode, and it will basically compensate for Earth's rotation, and it will make sure it doesn't deviate. And the way you do it, you have the switch by default in magnetic in a cold start, and you press the sync button for a few seconds until the compass stops moving, which is already stopped because it's aligned by default, and then you let the button go, and then you switch it into the gyro mode. Also, in order for it to function correctly, it has to have a correct latitude set, and you change it by turning this knob, but by default when you spawn it has a correct latitude input. Unless you fly somewhere else on the map, then you might want to adjust it. Next thing, you need this SPU 52 switch on, and that's all your it works together with the autopilots, and it makes sure the autopilot has the authority to move the cyclic and the collective for different holds. Then I like to turn on the roll autopilot channel and a pitch autopilot channel. I don't like to use the yaw and the altitude hold. I do use it when I need to fly straight, and I have them bound to my joystick. I turn them on and turn them off when I need to. But these two that I always use. Next thing you have these two blinking lights up here. These are for the two gyroscopes. They need to be caged and uncaged for them to align properly, and you do it with these two buttons here. This button, when you hold it, it cages this, and when you let it go, it now starts functioning, and it should show the correct pitch and roll indication. And for this one, you have this button right here. You cage and uncage it, and now it should function correctly. Now I come down here and I turn on the sight, and this is it turns on this sight on your heads-up display. And I turn on the ranging to automatic mode. Now there are two ways you can set your aiming reticle. There's a manual mode and there's an automatic mode. The automatic mode uses your Doppler system navigation, your radar altimeter, and your pitch and roll indicator to calculate the impact point for various weapons. And there's a manual mode that you can manually set the range using this knob right here. And you can use these to move the reticle up and down and left and right. I usually flick it to the automatic mode because it works actually pretty well, and it does give you a pretty accurate solution. I turn this switch into the up position. This is for the cannon. This is the increase fire rate and decrease fire rate. This is slow fire rate and high fire rate. I like it in the higher fire rate, and this is how I use it mostly. And I turn this fire control switch on, allowing you for the control of the weapons. And this switch here, I use it in the auto mode. In the manual mode, you can manually set it up and down, left and right. In the automatic mode, it will set itself. And in the automatic mode, it's also will connect to where Petrovich is looking in the sights, and it will show me where exactly he is looking, so I can align my targeting reticle with his for using the ATGMs, which I will explain in one of the future videos. Then I come back to this right panel here, and I turn the air conditioning on. I set it to the auto mode, and I set it to whatever this is, 19 degrees. And right now the aircraft is ready to be taxied and for the takeoff. And in the next video I'll go over taxiing and taking off and some basic flight in the Mi-24. Now thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful and educational. And if you have any questions, or if I said something wrong, feel free to post a comment down below, and I will be sure to respond. Now, thank you for watching. Snuggle Fairy checking out.